The dust cloud rose so thick that Penelope Harris could taste the grit between her teeth as she urged her mare forward, panic clawing at her throat while 3 riders closed in from the left and 2 more from the right, boxing her into a canyon pass where the red rock walls narrowed like the jaws of some ancient beast. She had made a terrible mistake leaving Carson City without an escort, but the telegram about her father's illness in McGill, Nevada had sent her racing across the territory without proper thought. And now these outlaws had spotted her 2 hours back and been herding her ever since, driving her away from the main trail and into this desolate country where no one would hear her scream. The year was 1882, and while the Wild West was slowly becoming civilized, there were still plenty of lawless men who saw a woman traveling alone as easy prey. And Penelope knew with sickening certainty what they intended once they cornered her completely. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she searched desperately for an escape route, but the canyon walls were too steep to climb, and the men behind her fired warning shots that echoed off the rock, making her mare dance sideways in terror. The lead rider, a scarred man with a black bandana pulled over his nose, was shouting something she could not make out over the thunder of hooves and her own ragged breathing. Penelope's fingers ached from gripping the reins so tightly, her dark hair having come loose from its pins hours ago to whip wildly around her face. She was 22 years old and had always prided herself on being sensible and level-headed, teaching school in Carson City and living a quiet, respectable life. But none of that mattered now as death, or worse, bore down upon her with relentless momentum. Just when she thought her strength would give out and her mare would stumble from exhaustion, a sound cut through the chaos that made her pursuers suddenly wheel their horses around. It was a rebel yell, fierce and wild, and then a lone rider came thundering down from a rocky outcropping above, his paint stallion navigating the treacherous slope with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat. The man sat his horse like he had been born in the saddle, his broad shoulders set with determination as he drew a rifle from the scabbard at his knee. He fired once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession, not aiming to kill but sending up plumes of dirt right beneath the hooves of the nearest outlaws. The effect was instantaneous. The men scattered, their horses rearing and plunging, and in that moment of confusion the cowboy drove his paint straight through their broken line like a battering ram. He leaned down from his saddle as he passed Penelope, his blue eyes meeting hers for just a heartbeat, and shouted, "Follow me and do not stop for anything." His voice carried absolute authority, and she found herself obeying without question, wheeling her exhausted mare to follow the paint's flying tail as they raced back the way the outlaws had come. Behind them, angry shouts erupted as the men realized their quarry was escaping, but the cowboy knew this country like the back of his hand. He led Penelope through a series of narrow passages and dried creek beds, zigging and zagging so their pursuers could not get a clear shot. And after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 15 minutes, they burst out onto an open plain where a small ranch house sat nestled against a hillside, smoke rising peacefully from its chimney. The cowboy did not slow his pace until they reached the fenced yard, where an older man with gray in his beard came out onto the porch with a shotgun already in his hands. "Jake, what is all this commotion?" The older man called, and then his eyes landed on Penelope's disheveled state, and his expression hardened. "Trouble. 5 riders herding this lady into Dead Man's Canyon," the cowboy said, swinging down from his saddle in one smooth motion. He was tall, probably 6 feet or more, with sandy brown hair that curled at his collar and a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. His clothes were dusty from hard riding, worn denim and a faded blue shirt, but everything about him spoke of capability and strength. They scattered when I broke their line, but they might work up the courage to come this way once they realize where we went. The older man nodded grimly. Get her inside. I will watch the road. He looked at Penelope with kinder eyes. You are safe here, miss. My son Jake does not bring trouble home without good reason, and those men will think twice before attacking the Vaughn ranch. Penelope's legs nearly buckled when she tried to dismount, her muscles screaming from the long, terrifying ride. Jake Vaughn moved quickly to her side, his hand steadying her waist as he helped her down, and even through her fear and exhaustion, she noticed the warmth of his touch and the concerned look in those startling blue eyes. Easy now, he said softly. You are all right. I have got you. Thank you, she managed, her voice coming out shakier than she would have liked. I thought I was going to die out there. They had been chasing me for so long, and I could not lose them no matter what I tried. You did well to stay ahead of them as long as you did, Jake said, and there was genuine respect in his tone. Most city folks would have been caught in the first mile. Come inside and catch your breath. My mother will want to see you settled. The interior of the ranch house was simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and sturdy furniture that had clearly been built to last. A woman in her 50s appeared from what must have been the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, and her eyes widened at the sight of Penelope's torn riding skirt and wild appearance. Good heavens, Jake, what happened to this poor girl? Over the next hour, as Penelope drank hot coffee and tried to stop shaking, the story came out in pieces. She explained about the telegram from McGill, how her father had taken ill while working as an assayer at one of the silver mines that dotted the region, and how she had set out alone in her urgency to reach him. Jake's mother, whose name was Margaret Vaughn, listened with growing concern and kept refilling Penelope's cup, while his father, Thomas, came in to report that there was no sign of pursuit on any of the roads leading to the ranch. Those cowards probably headed back to whatever hole they crawled out of, Thomas said, his weathered face creased with disgust. But you cannot continue to McGill alone, miss. It is another day's ride from here, and if those men are still in the area, they will be watching the trails. I will take her, Jake said, and everyone turned to look at him. He met his parents' surprised gazes steadily. I have been meaning to ride up to McGill anyway to check on the cattle we sold to the mining company last month. Make sure they are treating the animals right and the payment is properly recorded. This just moves my timeline up a few days. Margaret frowned. Jake, that is a long ride for just the two of you. People will talk if you are traveling together unchaperoned. People can talk all they want, Jake replied evenly. But Miss Harris needs to get to her father, and I am not about to let her ride alone after what just happened. We will be careful and keep to the main roads where there are other travelers. Her reputation will be just fine. Penelope felt warmth creeping into her cheeks, both from embarrassment at being discussed like she was not in the room, and from something else she could not quite name as she watched Jake argue for the right to escort her. He had risked his life to save hers, riding straight into danger without a moment's hesitation, and now he was offering to take days out of his own schedule to ensure her safety. She had never met anyone quite like him, and she found herself studying the strong lines of his profile as he spoke to his parents. The way his hands moved expressively when he was making a point, the hint of gentleness that softened his rough cowboy exterior. I would be grateful for the escort, she said quietly, and Jake turned to look at her with a smile that made her pulse quicken inexplicably. But I do not want to impose on your kindness any more than I already have. You saved my life today, Mr. Vaughn, and I will never forget that. Jake, he corrected. Just Jake. And it is not an imposition, I promise. Besides, I would not sleep well knowing I sent you off alone when those men might still be out there." His eyes held hers for a long moment, and Penelope felt something shift in the air between them, some wordless understanding passing back and forth. Margaret sighed but nodded. "Well, if you are determined to go, you will leave at first light tomorrow. That gives the horses time to rest and us time to pack proper provisions. Miss Harris, you will sleep in the spare room tonight, and I will see if I can mend that tear in your skirt. You cannot arrive in McGill looking like you have been dragged through a thorn bush." That evening, after a hearty supper of beef stew and cornbread, Penelope found herself sitting on the porch with Jake, while the sun set in a spectacular display of orange and gold across the Nevada desert. The temperature had dropped with the disappearing sun, and she wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders, grateful for the peaceful moment after the terror of the afternoon. Jake sat on the porch railing, one boot propped against the post, his profile outlined against the dying light as he gazed out over the land his family worked. "You have a beautiful home," Penelope said softly. "It must be hard work, but I can see why you love it." Jake glanced at her, and there was something almost shy in his smile. "It gets in your blood, I suppose. My father homesteaded this land 20 years ago, back when this whole territory was even wilder than it is now. I grew up knowing every rock and creek bed for 20 miles in any direction. Could not imagine living any other way, really. I have always lived in towns," Penelope admitted. "Carson City is not very big, but it has schools and churches and shops. I teach at the elementary school, mostly children between 6 and 12. It is good work, important work, but sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have all this space around me, to be able to ride for hours and see nothing but open sky." "It can be lonely," Jake said honestly, "especially in winter when the weather keeps you closed to the house for days at a time. But it is also freedom in a way city folks do not always understand. You answer to yourself and the land, and if you treat both with respect, you can build something real and lasting." He paused, then added more quietly, "I am glad I was out checking the north pasture this afternoon. Glad I heard the shots and came to investigate." "So am I," Penelope said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you had not been there. Those men, they were not just trying to rob me. I could see it in their eyes." Jake's jaw tightened, and when he spoke his voice had gone hard. "Men like that are cowards who prey on anyone they think cannot fight back. They would not have lasted 5 minutes against someone their own size. But you are safe now, and I will make sure you stay that way until you are with your father." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Penelope found herself stealing glances at her rescuer, trying to understand the strange feelings that had taken root in her chest. She had been courted before, had even been engaged briefly to a banker's son in Carson City, before they mutually agreed. They were not suited to each other, but she had never felt this immediate connection to anyone. Jake Vaughn was unlike any man she had known. Rough around the edges, perhaps, but with a core of decency and courage that shone through everything he did. The way he had ridden to her rescue without thought for his own safety, the gentleness in his hands when he helped her dismount, the respect in his voice when he spoke to her, all of it combined to paint a picture of a man worth knowing better. "Tell me about your father," Jake said, pulling her from her thoughts. "What does an assayer do exactly? I know it has something to do with the mines, but I have never been clear on the details." Penelope was grateful for the distraction from her confusing emotions. "He tests the ore samples that come out of the mines to determine how much silver or other valuable metals they contain. It is precise work, requires a lot of chemistry and mathematics, and the mining companies rely on assayers to know whether a claim is worth developing or not. My father has been doing it for 15 years, ever since my mother passed away. He taught me some of the basics when I was younger, before I decided to become a teacher instead. He must be proud of you, Jake said. Teaching is noble work, shaping young minds and all that. I hope he is proud, Penelope said softly. We have not always seen eye to eye on everything. He wanted me to marry someone wealthy and settled, someone who could give me an easy life. But I wanted to make my own way, to be useful in the world. We argued about it quite a bit before I took the teaching position. She swallowed hard. The telegram said he had collapsed at work, that the doctor was not sure if it was his heart or something else. I have been so worried. And then today with the outlaws, I started thinking I might never see him again, never get the chance to tell him that I understand he was just trying to protect me in his own way. Jake reached over and gently covered her hand with his, the touch sending a jolt of warmth up her arm. You will see him, he said firmly. We will get you to McGill, and I bet we will find him sitting up in bed complaining about the food and demanding to get back to work. From what you have told me, your father sounds like a tough old bird who will not let a little thing like collapsing slow him down for long. Penelope laughed despite herself, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. You are probably right. He has always been stubborn as a mule. Thank you, Jake, for everything. I do not know how I will ever repay you. No repayment necessary, Jake said, giving her hand a squeeze before releasing it. Just promise me you will be more careful in the future. Travel with someone if you can, or at least let people know your route so someone will come looking if you do not arrive on time. I promise, Penelope said, and she meant it. She was not usually reckless, but fear for her father had overridden her common sense, and she had nearly paid a terrible price for it. She would not make that mistake again. They set out at dawn the next morning, both of them mounted on fresh horses with saddlebags packed full of provisions courtesy of Margaret's generosity. Thomas had drawn Jake a detailed map showing the safest route to McGill, one that kept to well-traveled roads and passed near several other ranches where they could seek help if needed. The morning air was crisp and cool, though Penelope knew from experience it would turn blazingly hot by midday, and she was glad for the early start that would let them cover good distance before the worst of the heat set in. Jake set an easy pace that ate up the miles without exhausting the horses, and as they rode he pointed out various landmarks and told her stories about the territory. He had a natural storytelling gift, making even mundane anecdotes about cattle drives and roundups sound entertaining, and Penelope found herself laughing more than she had in months. There was something liberating about riding across the open desert with the wind in her face and a strong man at her side, something that made her understand what Jake had meant about the freedom of this life. Around mid-morning, they encountered a family in a covered wagon heading in the opposite direction, and Jake hailed them to ask about the road ahead. The father, a weathered man with tired eyes, reported that he had seen no signs of trouble between here and where they had camped the previous night, but warned that there had been reports of outlaw activity all along this stretch of territory. You keep a sharp eye out, he advised Jake. Especially traveling with a lady, there are men who would not think twice about causing harm. I will be careful, Jake promised, and they parted ways with mutual wishes for safe travels. As the sun climbed higher, and the heat began to shimmer off the desert floor, they stopped to rest the horses in the shade of a rocky overhang. Jake helped Penelope down from her saddle, his hands once again steadying her waist, and this time she was acutely aware of how close they were standing. how she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes and smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. He seemed to realize it too, because he held onto her a moment longer than strictly necessary before stepping back with a slight clearing of his throat. "We have made good time," he said, pulling out the canteen and offering it to her first. "If we keep this pace, we should reach the way station by evening. It is run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson who rents out rooms to travelers. We can sleep there tonight and push on to McGill tomorrow." Penelope nodded, taking a long drink of the lukewarm water and trying to ignore the way her skin still tingled where Jake's hands had been. She was being ridiculous, she told herself firmly. The man had rescued her and was escorting her to her sick father out of sheer decency. Reading anything more into his kindness was foolish and would only lead to embarrassment and disappointment. Besides, she barely knew him, had not even met him 24 hours ago. Whatever these feelings were that kept bubbling up inside her, they were just a natural response to the danger she had been in and the relief of being safe. Nothing more. But as they remounted and continued their journey, Penelope could not stop herself from watching Jake when she thought he was not looking, admiring the easy confidence with which he sat his horse and the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert for any sign of danger. He caught her staring once and gave her a questioning smile that made her blush and quickly look away, and she thought she heard him chuckle softly before he urged his paint into a slightly faster walk. The way station appeared on the horizon just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, a sturdy adobe building with a corral and small barn attached. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a plump woman in her 60s with a no-nonsense manner and kind eyes, and she took one look at Penelope's travel-worn appearance and immediately began fussing over her like a mother hen. "You poor dear. Come inside at once and wash up. I have stew on the stove and fresh bread just out of the oven. Jake Vaughn, you take care of those horses and then you can eat too. I will not have anyone going hungry under my roof." The room Mrs. Patterson showed Penelope to was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt and a washstand with a pitcher of water. Penelope stripped off her dusty clothes and washed as thoroughly as she could with the limited water, then changed into the spare dress Margaret had insisted she take, a simple blue calico that was a bit loose in the waist but otherwise fit well enough. When she emerged, feeling more human than she had since leaving Carson City, she found Jake already seated at the long table in the main room, his hair damp like he had washed up at the pump outside. He looked up when she entered and something flickered in his eyes, something warm and appreciative that made Penelope's breath catch. "You clean up nice," he said with a grin, then seemed to realize how that sounded and added hastily, "Not that you looked bad before." "I just meant, well, you know what I meant." Mrs. Patterson cackled from her position at the stove. "Smooth as always, Jake. It is a wonder you do not have every girl in the territory chasing after you with charm like that." Jake's ears turned red, and Penelope found his embarrassment endearing. She took the seat across from him and smiled. "I knew what you meant. Thank you. It feels good to be clean, even if it is just a quick wash." Dinner was a lively affair with Mrs. Patterson keeping up a steady stream of gossip about the various travelers who had passed through recently and questioning Jake about his family's ranch. The widow had clearly known the Vaughns for years and was not shy about her affection for them. "Your mother is a saint for putting up with you and your father," she told Jake fondly. "Two stubborn men who think they know everything, though I suppose you come by it honestly enough." After the meal, Penelope pleaded exhaustion and retired to her room early, but sleep proved elusive despite her tiredness. She lay in the unfamiliar bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind churning with thoughts of her father and worry about what she would find in McGill, but also, increasingly, with thoughts of Jake Vaughn. She kept replaying the moment he had come thundering down from the rocks to save her, the absolute certainty in his voice when he told her to follow him, the gentleness in his hands when he helped her down from her horse. She thought about his stories during their ride, the way his whole face lit up when he talked about something he loved, the protective way he watched over her without making her feel weak or helpless. Penelope had never believed in the romantic notion of love at first sight, had always thought it was something novelists invented to make their stories more exciting. But now she was beginning to wonder if perhaps there was some truth to it after all. How else could she explain this overwhelming feeling that had taken hold of her, this sense that Jake Vaughn was someone important, someone she could not afford to lose? It was madness, complete madness, and yet her heart seemed utterly convinced of it even as her mind urged caution and rationality. In the morning they set out again, and Penelope noticed that Jake seemed quieter than he had been the previous day, almost pensive. They rode in companionable silence for the first hour, and then he suddenly spoke up. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," Penelope said, curious about the serious tone in his voice. "You have someone waiting for you back in Carson City, a beau or a fiancé or anyone like that?" Jake kept his eyes fixed on the horizon as he spoke, as if the question was casual, but Penelope could hear the tension underlying the words. Her heart began to beat faster. "No, there is no one. I was engaged once briefly, but we broke it off more than a year ago. We wanted different things from life." She paused, then gathered her courage. "Why do you ask?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally looked at her, there was something raw and vulnerable in his expression. "Because I have been trying to figure out if what I am feeling is just a natural response to the circumstances, or if it is something real. I do not make a habit of falling for every woman I meet, but there is something about you, Penelope. Something that makes me want to know everything about you, to hear all your stories and your thoughts and your dreams. And I know it is too fast. I know we just met and you have every reason to think I am crazy. But I also know that opportunities do not always come around twice in this life, and I would regret it forever if I did not at least tell you how I feel." Penelope's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she could not speak around the sudden tightness there. When she finally found her voice, it came out softer than she intended. "You are not crazy, or if you are, then so am I, because I have been feeling the same thing. I keep telling myself it is impossible, that I cannot possibly have real feelings for someone I met less than 2 days ago, but my heart does not seem to care about logic or reason." Jake reined his horse to a stop, and Penelope did the same, turning to face him fully. They were in the middle of the desert with nothing around them but sagebrush and distant mountains. But Penelope had never felt more seen or more alive than she did in that moment with Jake's eyes locked on hers. He swung down from his saddle and came to stand beside her horse, reaching up to help her down. And this time when his hands circled her waist, he did not let go. He stood there holding her, their faces just inches apart, and Penelope could feel the warmth radiating off him and see the rapid pulse beating in his throat. "I do not want to take advantage," Jake said hoarsely. "You have been through a terrible ordeal, and I do not want you to think I expect anything just because I saved you. That is not why I did it, and that is not why I am saying these things now." "I know," Penelope whispered. "I can see the kind of man you are, Jake. You have honor and kindness, and you have treated me with nothing but respect from the moment we met. What I am feeling is not gratitude or obligation. It is something much deeper than that, something that scares me a little because it is so strong and so sudden. Can I kiss you? Jake asked, and the fact that he asked, that he gave her the choice, made Penelope's heart swell even more. Yes, she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first and then with growing passion as she responded, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders as his arms tightened around her waist. The kiss seemed to last forever and not nearly long enough, and when they finally broke apart they were both breathing hard, staring at each other with a mixture of wonder and desire. That was, Jake started, then shook his head with a slightly dazed smile. I have never felt anything like that before. Neither have I, Penelope admitted. Her lips still tingled from the kiss, and she could feel a blush spreading across her cheeks. Jake, I do not know what happens after we get to McGill. I do not know how long I will need to stay with my father or what my responsibilities will be, but I do not want this to end. Whatever this is between us, I want to explore it to see where it might lead. So do I, Jake said fervently, and we will figure it out, I promise. Right now, let us just focus on getting you to your father. Once we know he is all right and you have had time to make sure he is properly cared for, we can talk about the future. About our future, if that is something you want. It is, Penelope said, and the certainty in her own voice surprised her. It absolutely is. They rode into McGill late that afternoon, both of them quiet with anticipation and nerves for different reasons. The town was built around the silver mines that dotted the hillsides, a collection of wooden buildings and tents that housed the miners and the merchants who supplied them. It was rougher than Carson City, more obviously a frontier town, but there was an energy to it that Penelope could appreciate even through her worry about her father. Jake helped her locate the boarding house where her father was staying, and then insisted on accompanying her inside, despite her protests that he had already done enough. The landlady, a thin woman with sharp eyes, directed them to a room on the second floor, and Penelope's hands were shaking as she knocked on the door. "Come in," came a weak voice, and Penelope pushed the door open to find her father propped up in bed, his face pale but his eyes alert. "Penny. Is that really you, Papa?" Penelope rushed to his side, tears streaming down her face as she took his hand. "I came as soon as I got your telegram. How are you feeling? What did the doctor say?" Benjamin Harris managed a weak smile. "The doctor says I am a stubborn old fool who pushed himself too hard and needs to rest. My heart is not what it used to be, apparently, though I could have told him that myself, and saved the consultation fee." His eyes moved past Penelope to where Jake stood in the doorway, and his expression grew curious. "And who is this young man?" Penelope straightened, suddenly aware of how this must look. "Papa, this is Jake Vaughn. He rescued me from some outlaws who were chasing me on the way here, and then he escorted me the rest of the way to make sure I arrived safely. I owe him my life." Benjamin's expression darkened with alarm. "Outlaws? Good God, Penny, what were you thinking traveling alone like that? You could have been killed." "I was thinking that my father was ill and needed me," Penelope said firmly. "And yes, it was dangerous, but Jake made sure nothing bad happened. He is a good man, Papa." Benjamin studied Jake for a long moment, and Penelope held her breath, hoping her father would not embarrass her by saying something harsh or dismissive. But then Benjamin nodded slowly. "Come here, young man. Let me shake the hand of the person who saved my daughter." Jake crossed the room and grasped Benjamin's hand carefully, mindful of the older man's weakened state. "I am just glad I was in the right place at the right time, sir. Your daughter is a brave woman. She kept her head even when things looked bad." "She gets that from her mother," Benjamin said, his voice growing softer. "Penny's mother was the strongest person I ever knew, right up until the fever took her. Penny is just like her in that way." He looked at his daughter with eyes that had grown suspiciously shiny. "I am glad you came, even if the journey was dangerous. I have missed you, girl." "I have missed you too, Papa," Penelope said, squeezing his hand. "And I am going to stay right here until you are back on your feet, so you had better follow the doctor's orders and rest properly." Over the next 2 weeks, Penelope settled into a routine of caring for her father, who proved to be a difficult patient despite his weakened condition. Jake stayed in McGill as well, ostensibly to take care of his business with the mining company, but really, Penelope knew to be near her. They spent the evenings together, walking through the town or sitting in the boarding house parlor talking for hours. And with each passing day, Penelope felt more certain that what she felt for Jake was real and lasting. Benjamin noticed, of course. Despite his illness, he was still sharp as a tack, and he cornered Penelope one afternoon when Jake had gone to check on the horses. "You have feelings for that cowboy," he said bluntly. "And unless I miss my guess, he has feelings for you too." Penelope felt her cheeks heat, but she met her father's gaze steadily. "I do. I know it seems fast, but Jake is special, Papa. He is kind and brave and honorable, and when I am with him, I feel like I can be completely myself. I have never felt that way with anyone before." Benjamin sighed, leaning back against his pillows. "Your mother and I knew each other for less than a month before I asked her to marry me. Everyone said we were crazy, that it would never last, but we had 30 good years together before she passed. So I am not one to lecture you about moving too fast." He paused, then added, "But I need to know that he can provide for you, that he will treat you right and give you a good life. I will not be around forever, Penny, and I need to know you will be taken care of." "Jake owns a ranch with his parents," Penelope said. "It is not a huge operation, but they are good people and they work hard. And he does treat me right, Papa. He treats me like I am precious, like my thoughts and feelings matter. That is worth more than all the money in the world." Her father nodded slowly. "Then you have my blessing, for what it is worth. But make him ask me properly before you accept any proposal you hear. I may be laid up, but I still deserve the courtesy of being consulted before my only daughter gets married." Penelope laughed, relief flooding through her. "I promise, Papa, though he has not actually proposed yet." "He will," Benjamin said with certainty. "That boy looks at you like you hung the moon and stars. It is only a matter of time." Benjamin was right. 2 days later, as Penelope and Jake were walking along the outskirts of town watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Jake suddenly stopped and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I have been thinking about what I want to say to you for days now, trying to find the perfect words, but I finally realized there are not any perfect words. There is just the truth, which is that I love you, Penelope Harris. I have loved you since the moment I saw you in that canyon, fighting to stay free even when you must have been terrified. I love your courage and your kindness and the way you argue with me when you think I am wrong. I love how you take care of your father and how you talk about your students back in Carson City. I love everything about you, and I know we have not known each other very long, but I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life getting to know you even better." Penelope felt tears welling up in her eyes, happy tears this time. "I love you too, Jake, so much it sometimes scares me." Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring, worn smooth with age. "This was my grandmother's ring. My mother gave it to me before we left the ranch and told me that if I found someone special, someone who made my heart glad, I should give it to her." He dropped to one knee right there in the dirt, still holding Penelope's hand. "Will you marry me, Penelope? Will you be my wife and my partner and the person I wake up next to for the rest of my days?" "Yes," Penelope whispered, and then louder, "Yes, absolutely yes." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly as if it had been made for her. Then he stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. And when he finally set her down, they kissed with all the passion and promise of two people who had found something rare and precious in each other. That evening, Jake formally asked Benjamin for Penelope's hand, and though her father made a great show of asking stern questions about Jake's prospects and intentions, Penelope could see the approval in his eyes. Benjamin gave his blessing with the condition that they wait until he was well enough to attend the wedding, which the doctor assured them would only be another few weeks if he continued to improve at his current pace. They were married 6 weeks later in a small church in McGill, with Benjamin looking considerably healthier as he walked Penelope down the aisle and Jake's parents, having made the journey from the ranch to attend. Margaret cried throughout the entire ceremony, and Thomas kept gruffly clearing his throat and pretending he had something in his eye. Mrs. Patterson came too, along with half the town it seemed, everyone wanting to witness the marriage of the cowboy who had rescued the schoolteacher from certain doom. Penelope wore a simple white dress that Margaret had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair that Jake had picked that morning. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Jake kissed her in front of everyone, Penelope felt like her heart might burst from sheer happiness. This man, this brave and wonderful man who had ridden to her rescue without a second thought, was now her husband, and she was his wife, and they would face whatever came next together. After the wedding, there were decisions to be made. Benjamin had decided to retire from assaying, his health no longer up to the demanding work, and he chose to move to the Vaughn ranch where he could live in the small guest house and help with the bookkeeping and other less physically demanding tasks. "I have spent enough years breathing in chemical fumes and squinting at ore samples," he told Penelope and Jake. "Time I learned something about ranching and spent my days in the fresh air. Besides, I want to be close to my daughter and whatever grandchildren you two decide to give me." Penelope blushed at that, but she was secretly pleased. She had worried about her father being alone as he grew older, and knowing he would be part of their daily life eased a concern she had been carrying since his collapse. As for Penelope's teaching position in Carson City, she wrote a letter resigning her post and recommending a replacement, explaining that her life had taken an unexpected but wonderful turn. The school board wrote back with congratulations and an invitation to visit anytime, and Penelope tucked the letter away as a reminder of her past life, even as she embraced her new one. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, as Penelope learned the rhythms of ranch life and Jake learned to share his space and his heart in ways he had never done before. There were moments of frustration and miscommunication, times when Penelope missed the intellectual stimulation of teaching and the companionship of the other women in Carson City, and times when Jake had to consciously remember that his wife was his partner and not someone who needed protecting from every little difficulty. But they worked through each challenge together, talking late into the night about their feelings and fears and dreams, and with each obstacle overcome their bond grew stronger. Penelope discovered that she had a knack for the ranch accounts, her education and mathematical mind making quick work of the financial records that had always given Thomas headaches. She also started teaching reading and writing to some of the ranch hands who had never had the opportunity to attend school, holding evening lessons in the main house that gradually expanded to include children from neighboring ranches. Jake built her a small schoolhouse on their property as a surprise for their first anniversary, and Penelope cried happy tears when he showed her the whitewashed building with its rows of benches and chalkboard at the front. "You gave up teaching to marry me," Jake said, holding her close as she wiped her eyes. But that does not mean you have to give up being a teacher. This way you can do both. Have your own school right here where you can shape young minds and still be home for supper every night. Their first child, a son they named James, was born in the spring of their second year of marriage. Penelope labored for 12 hours with Margaret and Mrs. Patterson attending her, and when Jake was finally allowed into the room to meet his son, he held the tiny bundle with such wonder and tenderness that Penelope fell in love with him all over again. Benjamin cried when he held his grandson for the first time, and declared that the boy had his mother's nose and his grandfather's stubborn chin, which made everyone laugh. James was followed 2 years later by a daughter named Pearl, and then another son named Joshua after that. The house that Thomas and Margaret had built so many years ago rang with the sounds of children's laughter and running feet, and though Penelope's days were exhausting, filled with cooking and cleaning and teaching and childcare, she had never been happier. Jake was a devoted father, playing with the children when he came in from working the ranch and reading them stories before bed in his deep, gentle voice. Benjamin lived to see all 3 of his grandchildren born, passing peacefully in his sleep when James was 5. Pearl was 3, and Joshua was just a baby. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a simple marker that read Benjamin Harris, beloved father and grandfather. And Penelope stood with Jake's arm around her shoulders, and her children clustered at her skirts, grateful that her father had gotten those years of peace and family before the end. As the children grew, the small school Penelope had started expanded into a real institution, with families from all over the region sending their children to be educated by the former Carson City schoolteacher who had married a cowboy. Jake added onto the building twice to accommodate the growing number of students, and Penelope hired a young woman fresh from normal school in Carson City to help with the teaching. The Vaughn Ranch became known not just for its quality cattle, but also for its commitment to education. And Penelope took fierce pride in the young people who graduated from her school and went on to build lives of their own. Thomas and Margaret eventually passed on as well, within 6 months of each other, and Jake grieved deeply for the parents who had taught him everything he knew about ranching and integrity and love. But he had Penelope beside him through it all, and their children, and the legacy his parents had built, and that gave him the strength to carry on. The years rolled by in a rhythm of seasons and hard work and quiet joys. There were difficult times, droughts that tested their resilience and harsh winters that claimed livestock, but there were also celebrations and victories, like the year James won the roping competition at the county fair, or the day Pearl graduated from normal school and announced she wanted to teach alongside her mother, or when Joshua brought home a sweet-natured girl named Ruth and asked permission to marry her. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Jake and Penelope rode out to the spot where he had proposed all those years ago. They were both graying now, with lines on their faces from years of sun and laughter and hard living, but when Jake took her hand and smiled at her, Penelope still felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt that first day when he had ridden to her rescue. "You ever regret it?" Jake asked softly. "Giving up your life in Carson City to marry a cowboy and live out here in the middle of nowhere?" Penelope turned to him, cupping his weathered cheek in her hand. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted, Jake Vaughn. Adventure and love and a family and a purpose. You gave me a life worth living." "You did the same for me," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was just going through the motions before you came along, working the ranch because it was what I had always done. But you made me want to be better, to build something meaningful. You made me whole." They sat there as the sun set, Two people who had started as strangers and become partners in every sense of the word. Their lives intertwined so completely that neither could imagine existing without the other. Behind them, on the ranch they had built together, their children and grandchildren went about the business of living, carrying on the legacy of courage and love that had started on a desperate day in a desert canyon, when a cowboy broke through a line of outlaws to save a woman being herded with no way out. Penelope had been rescued that day, but in truth, they had rescued each other. Two souls finding their way home through chance and courage, and the kind of love that only comes along once in a lifetime. And as the stars began to appear in the vast Nevada sky, Jake pulled Penelope close and kissed her softly, a promise renewed after 25 years and still as strong as it had been on that first day. They lived many more happy years together, watching their children raise families of their own and their ranch prosper through good years and bad. When Jake finally passed away peacefully at the age of 78, surrounded by his family, Penelope held his hand and whispered that she would see him again soon, that this was not goodbye but just a brief parting. She followed him 6 months later, and they were buried side by side on the same hillside as Benjamin and Thomas and Margaret, their simple markers a testament to lives well lived and love well earned. The school Penelope founded continued for another 50 years before the children of the region began attending the new consolidated school district in town. But the building still stood as a monument to her vision and dedication. The Vaughn Ranch stayed in the family through 4 generations, with James's great-grandson eventually taking over the day-to-day operations. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, people swore they could almost hear the echo of Jake's laugh and Penelope's voice reading stories to children long since grown. It had started with terror and desperation, with a woman being hunted and a cowboy brave enough to ride to her rescue, but it had become something infinitely more precious. It had become a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that true courage is not just about facing down outlaws, but about opening your heart to the possibility of love even when logic says it is too fast, too sudden, too improbable. Jake and Penelope had taken that leap of faith together, and they had built something beautiful that lasted long after they were gone, a legacy of love that would endure as long as the Nevada desert stretched beneath the endless sky.